There's a specific kind of scene in television that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with swelling music or a dramatic camera push. It's just two people in a hallway or a break room or standing outside a door that neither of them wants to walk through. And somehow, in that quietness, the entire soul of a show reveals itself. The Pit does this constantly. But in Season 2, it started doing something more deliberate, more precise. It started building something between Dr. Abbott and Robby that I don't think enough people are talking about. And honestly, I think that relationship, that specific, complicated, unspoken bond, might be the most psychologically rich thing the show has ever put on screen. So let's talk about it. Let's actually sit with it, because it deserves more than a surface read. When Dr. Abbott first shows up in any meaningful capacity in Season 2, there's a temptation to read him as a foil. The older doctor, the one who's seen it all, maybe a little weathered, a little closed off, carrying that particular brand of institutional fatigue that you find in any long-serving medical professional who's been doing this work for longer than some of his colleagues have been alive. And on the surface, sure, that reading isn't wrong, but it's incomplete in a way that I think the writers are very much aware of. What makes Abbott genuinely fascinating is that the show resists the urge to make him wise in an obvious way. He doesn't deliver speeches. He doesn't pull Robby aside and say the right thing at the right moment with perfect clarity. What he does instead is something far more human. He's present. He keeps showing up. And in a season where Robby is actively, almost desperately, trying to outrun the psychological weight pressing down on him, that act of consistent, quiet presence starts to mean everything. Think about the architecture of who Abbott is when we strip away the professional context. He's a man who has processed trauma, likely silently, likely without much external support, over the course of a career that has demanded he absorb grief and loss and failure as a matter of routine. The show doesn't hand us his backstory in neat exposition. It reveals him obliquely, through the way he moves through the ER, through what he chooses not to say, through the specific patience he extends to Robby that he doesn't seem to extend to everyone. That selectivity is meaningful. Abbott isn't warm with everyone, which means when he's warm with Robby, it's not personality, it's intention. Here's the thing about Robby that Season 2 keeps circling without ever quite landing on directly. He's a man who has learned to treat his own mental health the way he treats an unstable patient in the ER. He stabilizes it. He manages the immediate crisis. He does just enough to keep it from flatlining. And then he moves on to the next thing before anyone can ask him how he's doing. It's a coping mechanism that looks from the outside like competence. It looks like strength. It looks like someone who has his act together. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. Because Robby isn't okay. He hasn't been okay for a long time. The events of Season 1 left marks that didn't close cleanly. And Season 2 is fundamentally about what happens when you try to function at full capacity while quietly carrying weight that would buckle most people. The show is smart enough not to make this a breakdown narrative in the conventional sense. Robby doesn't fall apart dramatically. He fragments slowly, in the micro-expressions he can't quite control, in the moments where he's a half-second slower to respond than he used to be. In a way, he holds conversations that should be simple with just a little too much caution. And here's what's subtle and devastating about this. Robby knows it. He's not oblivious to what's happening inside him. He's a doctor. He understands the physiology of stress and trauma probably better than most people on the planet. But understanding something intellectually and being able to emotionally process it are two completely different things. And the gap between those two modes of knowing is exactly where Robby lives in Season 2. He's drowning in plain sight. And most of the people around him either can't see it or have convinced themselves that if Robby needed help, he'd ask for it. That's the lie that exhausted, high-functioning people tell themselves, and the Pit knows it. So what does Abbott actually do? What is his function in Robby's life? And why does it matter as much as I'm suggesting? The answer, I think, lies in something that's genuinely underrepresented in television. The healing capacity of platonic male friendship that doesn't require either party to name itself out loud. Because Abbott and Robby never have a conversation about their relationship. They never sit down and say, "I care about you," or "I'm worried about you," or anything that would read as overtly emotional in a traditional sense. And yet the emotional content of what passes between them, in looks, in timing, in a specific way Abbott positions himself in Robbie's orbit during the worst moments, is extraordinary. It's the show trusting its audience to understand that men can communicate care in ways that don't look like care from the outside. There's a kind of shorthand that develops between them across the season that feels genuinely earned. Abbott isn't performing concern. He's not running some kind of psychological intervention or trying to fix Robbie the way a therapist might. He's doing something older and more instinctive than that. He's bearing witness. He's saying, through behavior rather than language, I see you, and I'm not going anywhere. And for someone like Robby, who has spent years becoming indispensable to everyone around him, who has built his identity on being the person others lean on, being seen without having to perform okayness is almost unbearably significant. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being the most capable person in the room, and the Pitt understands this with a specificity that most medical dramas never bother with. Robby's isolation isn't the loneliness of someone without people around him. It's the loneliness of someone who is always needed but rarely known. Abbott, almost uniquely, moves toward the person underneath the attending. And Season 2 keeps finding quiet, almost incidental ways to show us this without ever underlining it. What makes the Abbott-Robbie dynamic so psychologically layered is the way the show positions them as mirrors of each other at different points in the same journey. Abbott has been where Robby is. He may not have experienced the same specific events, but the structure of his experience, the weight of responsibility, the slow erosion that comes from years of bearing witness to suffering without adequate processing, the way the job eventually starts to cost more than it gives. The structure is familiar to him in a bone-deep way. The show never makes this explicit, which is the right call. What it does instead is let Abbott's behavior carry the implication. When he doesn't press Robby in moments where another character might push for transparency, it doesn't read as indifference. It reads as someone who knows from experience that pressure in those moments is counterproductive. When he stays nearby during scenes where Robby is clearly struggling, it's not surveillance. It's the particular attentiveness of someone who's been left without that same anchor and knows what the absence of it costs. And Robby, for his part, seems to understand this about Abbott without ever having to articulate it. There's a trust there that the show builds carefully, not through grand gestures, but through accumulated small moments that add up to something significant. The way Robby will take a breath when Abbott walks into a room. The way certain scenes that begin with Robby visibly coiled will end with him just slightly more open if Abbott has been present for them. These aren't accidents. This is the writing doing something very precise about how healing actually works, not in dramatic revelations, but in the slow loosening of something that's been held too tight for too long. That I want to stay here for a minute, because I think the Pitt is doing something genuinely important in Season 2 that gets lost in conversations about plot momentum or procedural mechanics. It's building a sustained, thoughtful argument about male mental health, and it's doing it through the Abbott-Robbie relationship in a way that feels neither preachy nor reductive. The dominant cultural narrative around men and emotional health still tends to operate in extremes. Either men need to be pushed to open up, confronted and coaxed into vulnerability in ways that feel almost adversarial, or they need to be left entirely alone because any attempt to engage will be rejected. What's rare on screen, and what the Pitt is actually showing us, is the middle territory. The space where two men can maintain genuine emotional connection without either party having to perform vulnerability in ways that feel foreign or uncomfortable. Where showing up is the language, and consistency is the act of care. Abbott doesn't fix Robby. Let's be clear about that. He's not a solution. He's not the person Robby needs to talk to about everything. He's something more sustainable than that. He's proof that Robby isn't as alone as the pressure of leadership has made him feel. And that proof, extended quietly over the course of a season, is what starts to shift something in the way Robby carries himself. It's not transformation. It's more like the beginning of the possibility of transformation, which, if you've ever watched someone actually work through something real, is exactly what it looks like. Not a breakthrough, Not a moment. Just a gradual, barely visible loosening. The show is smart enough to know that this is what it looks like when men actually help each other. Not in the dramatic mode that television usually reaches for. In the quiet, ordinary, persistent mode that real friendship actually operates in. I think it's worth stepping back for a moment and acknowledging the craft here, because the writing around Abbott in Season 2 is doing something genuinely difficult. The show is asking us to find a character compelling based almost entirely on restraint. Abbott doesn't have the most screen time. He doesn't have the most lines. He doesn't anchor the most chaotic set pieces or deliver the emotional monologues that get clipped for social media. What he has is precision. Every scene he's in, every exchange he has with Robby, every moment of positioned silence or perfectly calibrated response is doing load-bearing work in the architecture of the season. This is the kind of character that requires a specific type of performance and a specific type of writing to function. He has to be interesting enough that we're always glad he's in a scene without being so interesting that he pulls focus from what the scene is actually about. He has to carry history in his face and body language without the show ever having to stop and explain that history. He has to be the kind of person who makes other characters feel safer without ever being softened to the point of losing his own edges. It's a genuinely hard balance to maintain across a full season. And what it creates, when it works, and in Season 2 it largely works, is a character who functions as a kind of structural safety net for both Robby specifically and the season's emotional architecture generally. Abbott is the reason certain moments involving Robby land as hard as they do, because we've watched Abbott watching Robby, and we've absorbed through that watching just how much is at stake in the condition of one particular man trying to hold himself together under extraordinary pressure. Here's a theory I've been sitting with, and I want to offer it carefully because I think it's implied rather than stated. Part of what makes Abbott so significant to Robby's arc in Season 2 is that he represents something Robby is afraid of becoming, and simultaneously, something Robby might need to allow himself to become. Abbott has survived this work. He's still in the ER, still present, still functioning, but he got there by finding a way to exist within the weight of it rather than trying to outrun it. There's a quality to him of someone who made peace with things that couldn't be changed, who learned to carry grief as a companion rather than a burden to be hidden. He's not unaffected. He's not numb, but he's found some kind of equilibrium that Robby, standing earlier in the same kind of journey, hasn't reached yet. The fear for someone in Robby's position is that reaching that equilibrium requires a kind of surrender that feels like failure, like admitting that the work is too much, like acknowledging limits in a professional context that has always rewarded the illusion of limitlessness. Abbott's presence quietly challenges that fear, not by arguing against it, but by simply existing as evidence that it's possible to survive this, to be shaped by it without being destroyed by it, to come out the other side still recognizably yourself. That's not a lesson Robby can be taught. It has to be absorbed gradually through proximity to someone who's already lived it. And that's exactly what Season 2 is constructing between them. Look, the Pitt is a medical drama. It has code blues and impossible decisions and the full machinery of genre television working around and through it. But what elevates it? What makes Season 2 worth sitting with seriously is its willingness to locate the most important story in the quietest place. Not in the emergencies, in the spaces between them. In two men standing in a corridor, not quite saying what they mean, and both of them knowing that's okay. Dr. Abbott matters because Robby matters. And Robby's mental health arc matters because it's real in a way that television rarely allows. Messy and slow and without clean resolution, progressing not in dramatic revelations, but in the accumulated weight of someone realizing gradually that they don't have to carry everything alone. Abbott is the character who makes that realization possible, not by doing anything heroic, just by showing up, just by staying. And honestly, I think that's the most radical thing a piece of television can say right now about men and emotional health and what it actually means to take care of each other. Not the grand gesture, not the confrontation or the breakdown or the triumphant recovery. Just someone staying, Someone choosing again and again to be present for a person who has built their whole life on not needing anyone. If that doesn't move you, watch the season again. You'll catch it this time. If you've been sleeping on the Pitt, Season 2 is the wake-up call. Drop in the comments. What's your read on the Abbott-Robbie dynamic? Are they building towards something more explicit? Or is the restraint the whole point? I want to know what you're seeing.